Is Elon Musk a savior of humanity or a sovereign of his own making? His birth chart suggests he might be both. With a Cancer sun and Ascendant that fuels his need to nurture humanity, and a bold Mars North Node alignment in Aquarius driving his ambition to revolutionize our world, Musk's astrology paints a picture of a man balancing vision and control, genius and self-interest. But here's the paradox. Does his quest to save the world stem from an altruistic heart or a desire for power, wealth, and legacy? His chart's shadowy 12th house Venus and intense Pluto in Virgo hint at a more complex story, one where brilliance meets obsession and innovation walks hand in hand with isolation. In this video, we'll explore the light and shadow of Elon Musk's astrology, uncovering the planetary markers of his genius, his vulnerabilities, and the karmic lessons that shape his extraordinary life. Is he humanity's boldest visionary, or its most enigmatic enigma? Let's find out. Another profound question for us to ponder. Welcome into the lab, everyone. I'm Daljeet, your host. This is Astrolab 21. The astrology laboratory for the 21st century. And the subject of today's video, certainly very much a 21st century figure, Elon Musk. Right? He's been one of the more fascinating humans on the planet. Enormously successful, has become the richest man in the world, which is no small feat. In a world of multi-billionaires, this guy's he's the king of the heap, if you will. So, ongoing series, we looked at another interesting character in the last video, which was the astrology of Donald Trump. And we looked at his shadow, power, and destiny. And here with Musk, we're going to ask, is this a savior or a sovereign? A very interesting question. And as I looked at his chart, that was something that I began to ponder. And it's something I've been pondering about the man himself, his actions, his behaviors, what he's done, particularly in the last 5 years. He's definitely made a move into a new domain. He's come out of the world of technology and finance and business and has injected himself into the political discourse. Not just here in America. He's active in the UK. He's active in Germany, trying to move the needle politically to the right. Which is his right to do, if that's his own political bent. But it's been very interesting, and it's drawn a lot of controversy, I think for good reason. What is the influence of the richest man in the world meddling in national politics? It poses a question that it's new. It's a new question. It's a 21st century question. So we're going to use 21st century tool. We're actually going to use a very ancient tool that has survived into the 21st century and is still quite relevant and quite useful, that being astrology. So, as always, I'm a proponent of it as a sense-making tool and is a great way of understanding the character of any human being, right? We're going to look at his chart and see what makes this guy tick. Try to get some insights into this enigma that is Elon Musk. And as I said as a preface to the video I did on Trump, I'm not trying to deify nor demonize this person. My goal is to humanize them, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a human being, just like you, just like me. He's got 11 planets, he's got 12 houses, he's got the same DNA we have, right? He just happens to have an extraordinary life. And sometimes it's useful to see what could make this life extraordinary. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a deep dive. So without further ado, we'll jump in and see whether Musk is our savior or is acting as a self-interested sovereign in this lifetime. So here we go. Elon Musk, and of course, images of rockets launching in the background. This is a man who has an incredible business career. SpaceX and Tesla probably being the most prominent, but later in the video, we'll look at a list of the businesses that he's been involved in, and it's quite extensive. So let's try to see what makes this guy tick. So as always, I like to start with what I call the sort of bird's eye view of the chart. Get a sort of gestalt, if you will, of what is this chart showing us? What are we getting with this unique blueprint? And of course, every blueprint is unique. It all has similar characters. We all have the planets. We all have 12 houses, a sign on each of those houses. But the unique blueprint is as different as every individual human being. Case in point, if we compare it to Trump's chart, you can just see it looks different. The aspects are different. The positions are different. We saw this great emphasis on the 11th through the 1st house in Trump's chart. Similar here, we do have a 12th and 1st house emphasis with Musk as well. And there are some really interesting parallels between their two charts. And as I said, that's something we are going to examine deeply in the next video when we look at the synastry between the two of them. But before we can get there, we want to know what's the deal with Musk's chart. What is the character and the characteristics of this chart? And the first thing, as always, I look at the big three. We want to look at the sun, the moon, and the rising in every chart to orient us to what is the sort of backbone, what is the spine of the chart. So we have the sun here in Cancer in the 1st house. We have a moon in Virgo in the 3rd house. And of course, the ascendant, as always, is in the 1st house. So right away, we learn something very specific about Musk. He is what we would call a double Cancer. Anytime you have two of the big three in one sign, and in this case we have sun and ascendant in Cancer in the 1st house, that makes someone a double Cancer in this case, right? If the moon were here as well, he'd be a triple Cancer. So whenever you have a doubling or a tripling of an archetype, it really tends to really show up quite profoundly in that personality. So we're going to see a lot of Cancer qualities in Musk's persona and his personality and his character, which I think is quite obviously demonstrated, and we'll see in this video as we sort of unpack all these layers. So we've got a Cancer, sun, and it's in a rather harmonious relationship with this moon. We see it's in a very close sextile to the moon in Virgo. And there's a lot of very interesting connections between this Cancer rising and this moon in Virgo in the 3rd house. As we'll see, he's got his fortune there. Pluto's also hanging out in the 3rd house. And there's a really powerful connection that we're going to unpack here between particularly this Mercury and this moon, which I'll demonstrate, because if you see, the moon is in Virgo, which is Mercury's sign. Mercury is in Cancer, which is the moon sign. This is something that we call mutual reception in astrology. These two planets are mutually receiving each other in their respective homes. It creates a great synergy between those planets. So what we can expect is that this moon has an outsized influence, if you will, on this Cancer ascendant. So we can't really look at these separately. They're deeply, deeply integrated in a very harmonious way, a very mutually receptive way. We're going to see is that this Mercury in very close conjunction with this ascendant is probably the signature feature of Elon Musk's chart. And I would argue of his character and of this lifetime. He is a very mercurial character. And I don't think you get to become a tech billionaire without being mercurial. And so we're going to unpack that and look at that a little bit deeper. So we've got this Cancer-Virgo connection. Very well-placed moon in the 3rd house. It's known as the joy of the moon. So it's a very auspicious position to have your moon in a chart. Now, after I look at the big three, when I'm looking at sort of this bird's eye view, I'm also looking for the most prominent aspects in a chart. What is connecting all these dots in a way? And again, we have a very important aspect that involves this Cancer ascendant with the sun and Mercury there, because they are all in what we would call a T-square to, we have Chiron up here in Aries, and we've got Uranus down here in Libra. Right? And these two planets themselves form an opposition across the spine of the chart from the 4th to the 10th. So this is what we call a T-square. And these are really important aspects. Whenever you see a T-square in a chart, you can pretty much depend on the fact that that is going to be a very important area of focus and need for integration. This Cancer rising Mercury Sun has to integrate this opposition between these other two planets. Wherever we see oppositions, those tend to be resolved through relationships. Wherever we see squares, those are more internal frictions and pain points sometimes that need to be internally resolved in the person themselves. So we're going to look at how is this T-square showing up in Musk's chart. Pretty prominent. The other things we see is we have another harmonious relationship. We have a nice air trine between his Venus in Gemini and his Mars in Aquarius, which is conjuncting his north node. Of course, we will look at this Mars quite closely, very appropriate from the guy who wants to occupy Mars, that his Mars would be very prominent in this chart, and it is connected to his destiny, as we're going to examine, right? Wherever that north node points to, that's the destiny of any chart. And his destiny is in Aquarius, is in innovation, and is in the 8th house. Other people's money, resources, challenging the norm, challenging the status quo, taboo areas of society and culture and relationships. We're going to unpack all of that. It's quite interesting, I think, and an interesting insight into some of his more private, as well as his very public displays of power and sort of curiosity, sort of an eccentricity, if you will. And I think this is part of what makes Musk enigmatic and even eccentric. Aquarius is quite eccentric. We couple that with this eccentric Uranus connected, as we saw in that T-square. We're going to see something very profound, I think, in this chart. The other opposition we're looking for, I'm seeing this Saturn, which is opposed to both Neptune at 0 degrees Sag and an out of sign aspect to Jupiter in Scorpio in his 5th house. And this is a really important and impressive and powerful opposition that I think shows up prominently in Musk's chart as well. And actually, there's another method that I use in analyzing charts. As some of you know, if you've been watching this channel, I've been integrating human design into my practice, into my private practice, my counseling practice, as well as doing videos here on the channel on it, because I think it's a fascinating tool. As I said, astrology, Astrolab is the astrology laboratory for the 21st century, and I think that human design represents a 21st century evolution of the science and art of astrology in many ways. So, which is why I use it personally. I'm using it in my practice, and I use it in my analysis here of charts. So anytime I do someone's chart, I always will pull up their human design chart as well. And here's a look at that. If this is unfamiliar to those of you who are just more familiar with astrology, the reason I point this out, and we'll look at it deeper in the video, but if we consider that Saturn opposition to both Jupiter and Neptune, we can see where it shows up here on the human design chart. It's coming from gate 20 to gate 34. And what's interesting about that is in human design, gate 20 and gate 34 form what's called the channel of charisma. This is quite a powerful, individuated channel, which just gives deeper insight, I think, into the nature of this character and what makes Elon Musk such an innovator and such a powerful force in the world. So that aspect now gives me a little more curiosity. I would probably look at it a little bit closer than I normally would, just as one of these aspects. So that's a really interesting thing to do. And if you want to see more of that kind of insight and analysis in future videos, if you're curious about integrating astrology and human design and you'd like to see me use that more as a technique, leave me a comment below and let me know. I'd be happy to do it and share it with you. I'm looking for ways to integrate those two systems because, integration and synthesis is really sort of my brand, if you will. So, but I'm not going to get in too deep into the weeds in that, but I just wanted to point that out as a way of, part of this initial assessment is that, okay, there's something even more significant about this aspect than we might see at first glance just looking at the astrology alone. So that's interesting. So that sort of sums up our overview of the charts. And now let's start to zero in and just see what is really the heart and soul of this chart. And as always, we want to start with the sun. Wherever the sun is in our chart is always going to be an area of focus. It is our identity. It is our purpose in any lifetime. So the sun is always an anchor to any chart from which the life force of the individual radiates. The other thing that's interesting is it's always an area where we're going to find two other planets never more than a sign away from the sun. And that's Mercury and Venus. And because of the nature of the solar system, because of the fact that, Venus and Mercury transit inside of the orbit of the Earth, whenever we're looking back at the sun, we're always going to see Venus and Mercury somewhere in the similar part of the sky, which is why they will always show up in a chart in either the same sign or either the two previous or subsequent signs, right? Make sense? So that's always why you're going to get a clustering around the sun in every chart. It's in your chart, it's in my chart. This is a consistent feature of astrology as we practice it. So that's a really interesting thing to note just off the bat. But let's focus in first on this Cancer sun in the first house. What is that signifying in the chart of Elon Musk? Well, let's talk about it. And this is how we always break down any symbol in a chart. We want to look at the planet in the sign and in the house. Every planet has a certain function. Every sign has a certain set of qualities, and every house has a field of experience where we use the energy of that planet, of that function. So the sun, our identity, our purpose in Cancer, right? This very nurturing house. And the first house, the house of the self, the personality, the mask that we wear in the world. So what do we have here with Musk's sun in Cancer in the first? And as I was doing my preparation for this chart, it became very clear to me that Musk does really exemplify this notion that every archetype has both a light and a shadow quality. This is true of all the planets. This is true of all the zodiac signs. Each one can constellate different aspects. They have many different facets. And there are light sides and there are shadow sides. This is the law of polarity. We live in a biverse, if you will. Everything is about duality and the integration thereof. So we can always see a light and a shadow side to any placement in any chart. And we all have usually a mix of these two qualities. And of course, this is the great gift of astrology, is the awareness of these archetypes and both the light and shadow qualities, so that we can move towards the more light and enlightened version of ourselves and try to avoid the more shadowy qualities that keep us in the dark and unconscious and unhealthy. And so we all have it, and I think Musk is no exception. He is a human being like the rest of us. We're going to see both the light and the shadow in all of his placements. And I certainly see them showing up. And so I've framed it in that way. And I think it's helpful both as a way of understanding astrology and as a way of understanding this incredibly enigmatic person that is Elon Musk. So what can we expect here? Sun in Cancer, first house. Well, Cancer, it's a very nurturing sign. So we're going to get a nurturing personality, deeply invested in protecting and fostering growth in his creations. Cancer is the most protective and nurturing sign of the entire zodiac. It's known for intuition, so intuitive decision-making and emotional intensity in leadership, right? That sun in Cancer is going to be emotional and intense, and it's going to want to lead, right? This is a person, anytime you get sun in a first house placement, they really identify as themselves. They are the business. He is Tesla. He is SpaceX. He is Neuralink. He thinks that way, right? He is X now, right? He puts himself at the center of everything. And this is just a characteristic of, sun first house personalities, regardless of the sign. The sign is going to tell us the qualities he's going to project through, the mask he's going to wear, the costume, if you will, of that personality. But that sun is going to be very prominent. And it's interesting to note, right? Both Trump and Musk are strong first house personalities. We got Pluto and Mars over there in Leo with Trump. Here we have Sun and Mercury in Cancer on the first with Musk. So there's just something very powerful and present. You can't ignore these kinds of people. They're going to be, as is exemplified by both these men, very prominent on the world stage. It's a very likely path to them being seen and known. There's part of their soul is desiring to have that expression. So fascinating to see. But of course, there's a shadow to all this light. What happens here is you can be prone to emotional volatility and a hypersensitivity. And I think we've seen this in Musk in his tweets and in some of his comments, and we'll see there's a very sensitive man hiding under this very hard shell that is classic Cancer, right? He's going to be very self-protective, and that behavior can alienate others. And he has kind of done this as well. We saw this with his takeover of Twitter, for example. It was very alienating. And yeah, the approach he demonstrated there can feel very paternalistic rather than collaborative. He kind of came in, he brought that sink in there, that sort of publicity stunt. Then he showed up in the Twitter headquarters. It was an example of this shadow quality that I think Musk demonstrates from time to time. So this raises questions. Whose needs are truly being served, right? And this is the first sort of clue as we start to tease out this question of savior or sovereign. And this pattern shows up repeatedly, and that's always what we're looking for in our analysis, is what are the patterns? What are the repeating patterns in this chart? So, as always, we want to look at these word clouds, right? These archetypes, these many facets that have light and shadow. So here we have this sun, this self-expression, the purpose of this life, the life force, the creative potential that wants to shine, that wants to radiate. And it's shining through Cancer, this very emotional, watery nature ruled by the moon. So we're going to see how the sun is ruled by the moon here. The moon becomes sort of a secret agent working behind the scenes and affecting the character and characteristic of how this personality presents in the world. But it's very instinctive, very sarcastic. We see a lot of this in Musk's tweets and some of his public comments, his love of memes, right? There's something a little manipulative about Cancer, and certainly I think Musk demonstrates this to a T oftentimes. And a sensitivity, a subjectivity, a security, a focus on the past, right? And as I've said in previous videos, Cancer is like the official sign of patriotism and nationalism. And I think this may be part of what is appealing to Musk about Trump. This whole make America great again, let's go back to the way it was. It's a very Cancer instinctual move. They want to protect the past, right? And something, again, very sort of paradoxical about this character. That Cancer past, but he also has this North Node Mars in Aquarius, which is all about the future, right? And so here he is with all the technology and Neuralink and AI, yet he's a very traditional-oriented person at heart, right? He's conflicted. There's an inner conflict that we'll see come out in this chart that explains, I think, the personality and why he's hard to read. This can be a tough read because Cancer is protective. It wants to hide behind that hard shell, the crab, because it's too sensitive. It can't take anyone poking at that tender, soft underbelly. So it creates this tenacious exterior to protect this emotional sensitivity. It's quite interesting. Now, the next thing I want to look at is this Mercury dominance, because I would argue that this is the most important planet in this chart, full stop. Now, why do I say that? Why am I saying that Mercury is the most important planet here? Well, it's exact conjunct, not exact, but within a degree of the ascendant. Anytime you get a planet with the ascendant, this is the most powerful point in a chart. So this is going to add a degree of emphasis to everything about this personality. It's going to have a mercurial quality to it. And there's just no denying that this human being is incredibly mercurial. You don't get to become the richest man in the world through technological innovations without a brilliant mind. And he is. He's a brilliant, brilliant person. Some have called him a genius. This Mercury is informing those qualities. This Mercury is informing that talent, as I'm going to demonstrate. So I think it dominates because of that fact, and it's influencing the mind, the identity, and his communication style. And it's in its own bounds and terms. What is that? What does that mean, own bounds and terms? And this is a technique those of you who just practice modern astrology may not be familiar with, but it's an ancient technique where we look at what we call bounds or terms and also decans. So every sign of the zodiac gets broken up into 5 distinct non-equal parts, which is ruled by one of the 5 planets. And then it's also subdivided into 3 equal parts, which is ruled by one of the 5 planets plus the 2 luminaries. So you get this sort of very subtle appreciation. It's like a magnified look at each sign. And so we can get some qualities that we will find within Cancer. So as we know, the moon rules Cancer. It rules this house, it rules this place. But inside of there, each of the planets has a little bit more authority and autonomy over each section of a sign. And in this case, we see that Mercury and the Ascendant are in the bound or terms of Mercury and in the decan of Mercury, which gives this Mercury a sense of autonomy. It's setting the rules for itself and for this Ascendant, and it gives it an inordinate amount of power. And this is really important. This is a subtle clue to say this Mercury is ruling this chart. Through its connection to the moon, they are sort of co-rulers. But based on this position, this Mercury really is going to determine the overall character, tone, and the destiny of this lifetime, for good or for ill. This is a mercurial character, and he exemplifies this mercurial nature to a T. It's quite obvious, but I feel like it is the chart ruler, and it's what I would call his daemon. And this is an old, very ancient Hellenistic technique that we can use in order to determine, the ancients were obsessed with this idea of daemon or genius. This is a Greek term, right? Like Socrates famously listened to his daemon as his guide, his spirit guide. It was like a voice in his head that guided him towards his highest expression in this lifetime. Someone like Porphyry was obsessed with, who was a Neoplatonist in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, right? And a great astrologer as well. And he developed this technique of determining which planet was the daemon for every chart. And it's something that I've been studying myself. I'm actually offering some courses on that. I hope to do that in the coming year, because it's a really fascinating technique to see where is your own personal genius, what planet is your daemon operating through. But I'm going to argue that in Musk's chart, it is undoubtedly this Mercury on the Ascendant. As I said, that's a Greek word. The Latin word was genius. This is our own inner genius. In modern times, we would call it our spirit guide. So I've got some Greek here. I'm even going to throw some Latin at you. Cogito ergo sum. You may have heard this phrase, which is, I think, therefore I am, which was the famous line from René Descartes, who is the father of modern science, after all. And in many ways, I feel like Musk is an inheritor of the Cartesian logic of modern science. And I think this is the perfect phrase for Mercury conjunct the Ascendant and the Sun in the 1st house. I think Mercury, therefore I am the Sun. My expression. This is a guy who just embodies this notion of being driven by how and what he thinks about the world. His unique perspective on the world is his driving force. Now, of course, that can show up in light and in shadow. So the light side of this, he is undoubtedly a brilliant thinker, a persuasive communicator, right? He's very effective in getting his message out into the world, and a strategic visionary. Absolutely. Like, he's demonstrated these qualities, these talents throughout his entire career. Again, you don't become the most successful, richest man in the world without some brilliance and some strategery. But of course, the shadow side is always ever present. He can be guilty of intellectual overreach. He can be impulsive in his responses, and he can dismiss alternative perspectives. And I think for me, this really started to come out in his acquisition and takeover of Twitter, where I saw some of these shadow aspects. You may have seen it too. I think, previously I'd really admired and was just in awe of this guy. I thought, wow, what a genius. Like, he really is a 21st century Edison, a 21st century Tesla, right? But then his character started to change, and that was an interesting maneuver. And I started to see, there's a different side of this guy. There's a hidden shadow quality that started to make itself known, in my opinion. And that's when I started looking at him more closely. I started looking at his chart, and some of these characteristics started to present themselves. And I think you can see it quite clearly. Again, I'm not for or against here. I'm just trying to point out, these qualities that he has. This is a human being, as I say. So Mercury is establishing its dominance, and it can manifest both as light and shadow. And if you think about Mercury, it's such an interesting planet. It's like, yes, it's communication. Yes, it's our thinking. It's our mind. It's how we speak. But it's also rules business, right? Commerce, exchange. Any exchange of information, of ideas, is all ruled by Mercury. So Mercury is very involved in business, in money, in currency exchange. And so not surprising, a guy whose his first thing was, well, he did the Yellow Pages thing, but really PayPal was what really put him on the map, right? Which is all about exchange. It was really what made e-commerce work, right? eBay and PayPal was like revolutionary in how we bought and sold things on the internet. It's completely changed the way we do business today. And you can see commerce is connected through Mercury, e-commerce. So just fascinating to see that this is obviously a very mercurial character, and it shows up in his chart, but it's, it's demonstrating that mercurial nature through this Cancer archetype, tenacious, manipulative, protective, instinctive. So not only the sun, but Mercury. So this is why we want to look at Cancer twice, because it's doubling down on that sort of moon-ruled, moody, introspective, emotional, sensitive, instinctual, sarcastic nature. So that's a good look at this, first house emphasis that we see in his chart. But then what did we say about the aspects that we were looking at? We've got this T-square here going on between Chiron and Uranus. So that's something that we want to take a deeper look at, because that's probably going to tell us a lot more about the nature of this Cancer rising, if you will. So we've got Uranus in Libra, we've got Chiron in Aries, T-squaring that position. So what do we expect here? Well, we've got, on the light side, right, a dynamic mind, fueled by innovation and the courage to challenge norms. So where are we getting that? Well, dynamic mind, a dynamic relationship, whenever you have an opposition in a T-square, it is a dynamic type of aspect, and it's affecting his mind, right? It's affecting this Mercury. And he's having to integrate this very innovative force, Uranus, with the courage to challenge norms, right? Chiron in Aries has to be very courageous. And on the light side, Chiron is the healer. It's the shaman of the zodiac. And so it could be this wizard of innovation, of being first to Mars, right? Chiron in Aries. Will that be his undoing, or will that be his great gift to humanity? It remains to be seen. But I think this aspect probably gives us a lot of insight into the nature of his character. This is someone who's going to thrive on disruption. This word disruption and Uranus are completely synonymous. And as we saw in Trump's chart, Trump is also a deeply Uranian character. Both of these men have very prominent Uranian aspects, right? And so that this disruption, this innovation, this rebelliousness is going to show up in their character. It's in their destiny, we would say. And this allows him to present ideas that spark societal change, right? This is a very powerful revolutionary force. But we always can look at the shadow side. It could be a tension-filled personality, prone to defensiveness and erratic behavior. The good and the bad with Uranus, like you never know what you're going to get. There's an unexpected, a suddenness, a change, particularly in Libra, because we'll see Libra is supposed to be all about balance and harmony and equilibrium, but what you find is it's constantly moving between two poles, trying to find the balance. And with Uranus there, and trust me, I speak with some authority on this because I also have Uranus in Libra in my chart, right? I mean, I was born a year before Musk. So all of our outer planets are in very similar signs. We have them in different parts of the houses, aspecting our inner planets much differently, but I can certainly relate to this Uranus in Libra. It's exactly opposing my moon in Aries. So I'm a Uranian character too, right? Many of us have this placement. If you have Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto in close aspect to your sun, moon, or rising, you're going to be Uranian or Plutonian or Neptunian, right? And it connects us to something, to the bigger collective in many ways. And, that's what's showing up here when we look at this position for Musk. It's interesting, I like this, his bold actions can leave others to clean up the fallout, right? So he will move in suddenly, impulsively, right? That instinctual, impulsive Cancer will get fueled by that Uranian energy and that Chiron in Aries, which is impatient and bold and, just wants to innovate and act before thinking sometimes, can leave a bit of a mess behind. And we've seen this also with, I think Twitter X is a good example of some of these shadow qualities. It was the first time we kind of saw some of the less savory characteristics of his personality, if you will. But, as we see, we've got Uranus here, the liberator, the revolutionary, the outsider, the genius who brings sudden change, all about freedom. His whole thing about purchasing Twitter was he was preserving freedom of speech. I think he really believes that, whether you agree with him or not. And I have my disagreements with whether he actually is a free speech advocate. And one of those reasons being, he was quite sensitive about criticism about him on the platform, which he censored, right? Classic Cancer, right? He can dish it out, but he can't take it. It's just a truism of this character. And you just see it in the way he operates in the world. But in his mind, he's changing the world. He's preserving freedom. He is a rebel. He is a revolutionary. He's doing it for humanity. I think he very much sees himself as this Promethean type of character. And he is in many ways. And he's going to do it in an unpredictable, radically nonconformist way. And he thrives, like Trump, this guy thrives on chaos. And this is part of what I think bonds them in many ways. They have a similar way of looking at the world. But of course, we have to always say this is the function of liberation, of being the outsider, the maverick. And in Musk's case, it's operating through the lens or the wardrobe, right? The costume, if you will, of Libra, right? Which is different than Trump, Trump's is through Gemini, another air sign. His unique genius comes through Libra, which is about balance, ruled by Venus, right? There's a beauty, there's a aesthetic quality to Libra. Fair, balanced. But as I said, it's rarely in balance, and it can often be quite unbalanced at times, particularly Uranus. Uranus is going to test the extremes of Libra. So extremes of elegance and harmony and politeness, and then it will probably push the boundaries on being crude and unfair and very impractical at times, right? So you're going to see many sides to this Libra Uranus in his character. Then we look up at the top of his chart, it's opposing Chiron, the wounded healer. And again, this can be the most compassionate, healing, kind. We all have this inner healer, this inner teacher, but it can also show us hidden shames that we have. Hidden gifts, but hidden wounds. It can have this sense of where we're handicapped, where we might suffer. It can be where we have self-inflicted wounds. And here we have Chiron and Aries. Top of his chart, 10th house. This is the part of him that is the innovator, that it wants to be first to Mars. Of course, this is the sign ruled by Mars. It wants to be pioneering and bold and courageous. This is so endemic to his character and to his ambition. It has this Aries quality. But is it also his Achilles heel? An idea of overreach, and this is another theme that comes up with both Trump and Musk, is an overreach, too much, a hubris, right? And so if you put these two magnanimous personalities together, I think that's one of the concerns, is they're going to try to do too much. And maybe they will succeed, and maybe he will be a savior, right? But we'll see. It remains to be determined, and it's something that you want to be cautious about, because that sense of pride and overwhelm can be a blind spot for them in many ways. But like I said, it remains to be seen. All right, but now we've looked at, I think, the most important focus of this chart. We've looked at this T-square. We've looked at what's going on with all this Cancer placement in this first house. And, really, this is what he's showing the world. This is how we see Musk and how Musk wants to be seen. He wants to be seen as this mercurial character. But as we said in the beginning, we also want to look at this moon because it's deeply connected. It's having this sort of subtle influence from the third house because it rules Cancer, and this mutual exchange between Mercury and the moon, I think, is quite fascinating. So So let's take a deeper look at this moon placement here, down in Virgo, broadly conjunct the part of fortune. I use a 5-degree orb for all of my aspects, so this is a broad conjunction, but conjunct by house and sign using whole house as I do. It's sharing a house with Pluto. This is not conjunct by any means, but I kind of characterize this as like they're in the same house, but they probably have separate quarters. When you have a conjunction, they're in the same room, right? If you have an exact conjunction, they're sharing a bed, right? That's that kind of metaphor I like to use. But it says, the moon and Pluto are housemates in the house of Virgo here, which is his third house. So there is an influence, and this is another, I think, emphasis part of this chart. I think this first third house connection is really the heart and soul of Musk's chart, and theoretically the engine of his personality in many ways. So what do we get with this Virgo moon in the third house? And as I said, this is a very well-placed moon. Third house is considered the joy of the moon. It's the place of the goddess. So the moon shines quite nicely here. It's in a nice aspect with the sun. So this is a good placement. I would expect more of the light sides of this placement. And here what we would expect from that is someone who is emotionally grounded in precision. I love that, right? It's like Virgo, precision, the moon, emotional grounding, and that third house is communication, detail. These are all Virgo qualities, problem solving, and a relentless pursuit of perfection, which is another very Virgo quality. Virgo wants perfect. Virgo is inherently imperfect, and so it's always seeking to improve. That's its goal. And I think he has demonstrated this to great effect throughout his career. But, of course, the shadow ever present. You could have an obsession with control and micromanagement that actually can stifle creativity, right? And this has been demonstrated and documented. His work at Tesla, certainly at Twitter X, we've seen this sort of micromanagement. And this can lead to an emotional detachment that masquerades as pragmatism and will leave him disconnected from deeper human connections. And this is another interesting part, I think, of his character. That sense of detachment. The Virgo moon can be very difficult, right? It's trying to be emotional, but Virgo is so practical. It's earth, it's Mercury ruled. It causes a lot of mental stress for people with Virgo moon. I think you would find anyone with a Virgo moon, their mind, their mental process is so intense. There's so much self-criticism, so much pressure to do it right, an obsession. And then they're hard on themselves, they're hard on everyone around them. This relentless pursuit of perfection, for good or for ill, is really part of Musk's makeup, really. So, that moon, that security, and again, it rules Cancer. This connection between Cancer and now this Virgo moon is really profound. And it has this beautiful nurturing quality, but it can be irrational. It can sort of ebb and flow, right? It has a lot of cyclical nature, like the moon itself. It has a feminine side. And, we talked about this a little bit with Trump's chart. I think he's someone with that eclipsed moon that really has trouble integrating the feminine. I don't see that as much with Musk. I feel like he's a lot more of an integrated personality in that regard. To his defense. But it also makes him very moody, right? That Cancer moon connection is it's a difficult one. And then to express through Virgo is tough. But this is the blessing and the curse here. I think his beautiful mind is a Virgo mind. That moon and Mercury together create that precision, the meticulousness, that critical and analytical intelligence, the perfectionist, always wanting to improve. It's always going to be better. The detail, the obsession, but they can be plagued by self-doubt. Usually comes with a sense of humility, which I think he probably has as well. Like if you hear him speak, I've heard him on podcasts, there is a humility to him, or there was, right? I think his character has changed quite a bit, and maybe that would show up in his transits. We could look at that separately, but I feel like he was very humble, right? He was a very soft-spoken, quiet person, very Cancer rising. He really exemplifies that Cancer quality, but in there, underneath, is sort of this hidden intensity and tenacity that is sort of veiled by the protective shell. Really interesting. So there we have that Virgo moon. But while we're here, we should probably look at this Pluto in Virgo as well. And of course, this is a generational signature. I myself am a Pluto in Virgo. I'm part of the Pluto in Virgo generation. And it's another thing that we'll look at in the next video. There's a generational tension between Trump's Pluto in Leo and Musk's Pluto in Virgo. I find quite fascinating. And we'll look at that. But let's just talk about what you get with Pluto in Virgo. And it's also trine to that Saturn in Gemini. So there's a connection that we probably want to unpack, which just adds a degree of sort of power and intensity and work ethic and perfectionism, really. So what do you get? Pluto Virgo, laser sharp focus on mastery and control in communication, right? Because we are coming from the third house of communication. And this is what gives him his ability to refine and perfect complex ideas. This just adds a depth to his mind, this plutonic quality that is obsessed with getting it right. But again, shadow, the obsessive tendencies towards that perfectionism could be a tendency to wield knowledge as a tool of manipulation. And again, that just reinforces that Cancer instinct to manipulate. This Pluto placement is also contributing, I think, to that quality in him. And this reinforces his reputation for being ruthlessly exacting, right? And we've heard reports of this, that he's a bit of a tyrant, what he's done on the line at Tesla, famously sleeping in his office and expecting everyone to perform to his level. Very Virgo, right? Now we've got Moon, Pluto, Virgo, and his fortune is there. So that obsession, right, that refusal to accept anything but perfect is really what has been driven his success, for better or for worse. It's also alienated him from many of his colleagues and his employees and others in his life. But that's the driving force that is fueling this personality, fueling this life. So interesting, isn't it? So yeah, we can look at those qualities of Pluto, and we will look at those more in terms of connecting this Plutonian character. He's another Plutonian figure. Not as Plutonian as Trump, I would argue. I would argue Trump is way more Plutonian, but it's unavoidable because it's connected to that moon, and because this Virgo Cancer connection here, I feel it is, I don't want to say it's deceptively Plutonian, but his Pluto is more personal, and it's more through his innovation and his connection and his communication, the way he expresses himself. He uses Pluto, I think, to good effect. And we're starting to see more of his plutonic nature emerge, I believe, in his foray into the political arena. And again, something we'll look at in greater detail when we look at his chart in conjunction with Trump's in a subsequent video. But again, we're working through Virgo here. So this Virgo archetype gets a double emphasis, if you will. Very, very Virgo personality. Not surprising. And as we step back out, now I think between these two placements, this connection, as I said in the beginning, between Cancer and Virgo is the heart and soul of this chart. This is really where I'm putting most of my emphasis in my analysis. And if you want to understand this guy, you got to understand how these planets are functioning in these configurations. And what are we learning here, right? This is the key, this Cancer-Virgo connection. Sun, Mercury, Moon, Pluto. All very strong. These are the fundamental components of Musk's psyche. And again, we can look at the light and shadow of all of these combined. What's going on with this unique configuration? Well, we can see he's got the ability to dream big. This Cancer first house just gives him this initiating quality. Remember, Cancer is a cardinal sign. It wants to initiate its visions, its dreams. But he can anchor those dreams in meticulous detail with that Virgo. And that is actually the driving force behind his revolutionary ventures. It comes from that hidden source of the lunar quality of Virgo. Shadow side, emotional detachment. We've seen that. And the tendency towards hypercriticism and over-analyzing, which could trap him in cycles of obsession and overreach. And that's what I'm looking out for. Where is he too obsessed, and where is he overreaching? And I feel like we're seeing that in his biography playing out in real time right now. This is a big move that he's made. Big gamble. So far it's paid off, but I'm curious to see and to analyze how this continues to present itself in his behavior, in his political maneuverings, in his business maneuverings, in his communication. How is this going to continue to show up? Because it feels karmic, and it feels, you can kind of frame this as fate versus destiny. And I feel like that's a really interesting framing, right? A lot of times when we encounter our shadow qualities, it feels fated. And when we're embracing the light qualities, it feels like we're on the course of our destiny. Somewhat of an oversimplification, but I think that's valid. Also, I'm just really fascinated by the mind of Musk, right? And we're starting to get an insight into it. But the other thing that I think is very fascinating about him is that he is self-diagnosed as having Asperger's syndrome. I think we see that show up in this Mercury-driven configuration. So let's talk about that briefly. Where does this neurodivergence show up? Well, Mercury conjunct the Ascendant in Cancer, right? That dominant Mercury is where we get that brilliant yet unconventional mind and a unique communication style, right? He is very soft-spoken in many ways, right? And that is Cancer. It doesn't speak loudly. It's quiet. It's reserved. It's protective, right? It's cautious in many ways. But his ideas are challenging to the norms, and this, I think, does reflect his neurodivergent perspective. I also think that T-square with Uranus and Chiron, which is very innovative and genius drive, but creates tensions and volatility, probably in his relationships and that leadership dynamic. He seems to have trouble with relating to other people, right? It doesn't seem like it's an easy, natural thing for him. And this is something quite typical of a neurodivergent personality as we've come to identify it. Again, this has a light and a shadow aspect to it, right? So on the lighter side of this, incredible, exceptional focus. And it's interesting, this idea of focus is also something that shows up very prominently in his human design. So another thing I like to sort of connect the dots there, but super focused mind, which is also a very neurodivergent quality, right? They can have incredible ability to just zero in and concentrate, just bringing incredible mental resources to any problem that they're trying to solve, right? And that leads to groundbreaking innovations. The emotional intuition from Cancer with that sharp analysis in Virgo is a rare visionary, which he certainly is. We've got to give him credit for that. But the shadow of perfectionism and defensiveness, those are the two things we just keep getting repeated, right? This is the pattern that we see. And so again, this is what we would want to counsel him against, or right, make him hyper aware of that. And I'm sure he is to an extent, but always, right, the shadows is where the unconscious lurks. It's our blind spot. And I'm sure this has strained all of his relationships, right? And we'll talk about that when we talk about his Venus and his very eccentric relationship dynamics that he's displayed over the course of his life as well. But yeah, that volatility from the T-square, it just complicates collaboration and emotional resilience. So it's fascinating to look. I feel like I understand how his mind works, and that sort of discomfort and that defensiveness and that obsession, that obsessive quality, so Virgo, isn't it? And to be expressed through Cancer, that T-square, that really is key to integrating his personality, right? When all those are clicking for him, he's unstoppable. And I'm sure at those times, those things were, and probably by transit we could look, and it was getting triggered by different transit triggers. And then other transit triggers are going to make those very difficult. And that's another separate application, of astrology. We look at the transits and we can say, this is going to be a tricky time. This is going to be a much more harmonious and graceful time, opportunity. And I probably will do that in the next coming weeks, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of curiosity about how this plays out in real time. And again, leave me a comment if you want to see those videos, because I'm curious to know what's of interest here, what's landing for you folks. So that's a pretty good analysis of what I think are the fundamentals of the chart. Now, we would be remiss to talk about Elon Musk and not talk about Mars. This is a guy who famously wants to occupy Mars. And it's not a surprise, as I said in the introduction, that this Mars is very prominent and placed with the North Node in Aquarius, in that this Aquarian desire to innovate technology, 8th house, to do it in very powerful, hidden, secret, even political ways. The 8th house is very political in many ways. To use other people's money, that's a very 8th house quality. And if PayPal is nothing else, he got rich off of handling other people's money. All of these things point to his destiny. And when he is aligned to this destiny, I think the true nature, the true spirit of this chart really emerges. But again, it's all about integration. We're always looking, how do we integrate all these parts of ourselves in a way that brings out the greatest characteristics and that diminishes the shadow qualities. And so we are going to take a look at this Mars placement. We're also going to look at his Venus placement. How does this influence his relationships, his private life, his love life, his relationship to his children? I'm going to look at his fascination with in vitro fertilization. Right, here's a guy who has 12 kids, 2 sets of twins and triplets. What's going on with that, right? This 8th house Mars in Aquarius is going to really show us what's going on with him at that very personal level, and that Venus and Gemini in the 12th house. But I'm going to save that. I'm going to put that into the extended cut, which I'm going to share exclusively on my Substack, which is I'm inviting you all to come over. Many of you already have. So if you want to see the rest of this video and some of the more deeper, intimate sort of connections in his chart, I invite you over there. You can go to, I'll put a link down below. But yeah, it will take you to my Substack, which is mutablefire21.substack.com. And as you can see, I've got the extended cut of the Trump video that I did last week. So it's a full hour and 10 minutes. The original inauguration video, all the articles I'm writing. So I invite you to join me over there. It's free, and then you will get all of my content directly in your email. So videos and articles, and as I said, I'm going to be doing some AMAs, hopefully give me a chance to interact with people. If you have questions about current events and topics, I think it'll be very fun, building a community there. So I'm going to jump to the end of this video for the YouTube version again, but join me over on Substack if you want to see the rest of it. All right. Now, the last thing I'm going to leave you with, we've looked at his whole chart, right? The only thing we haven't talked about is his South Node in Leo. And this is something that really popped out to me when I was looking at the synastry between Musk and Trump. Because this South Node in Leo at 15 degrees in his second house of money happens to be in a close conjunction with Trump's Pluto. We're going to look at this more in the next video, which is going to be a deep dive into the synastry between Musk and Trump, but I'll give you a little preview. This connection suggests a shared karmic history. Whenever you get the nodal axis and Pluto in a synastry chart, it's showing us shared karma and hinting at a dynamic interplay of power and influence in their current relationship. This raises concerns about an alliance built on ego, ambition, and a shared need for control, potentially at the expense of collective well-being. This is a fascinating aspect and an application of astrology, and a branch of astrology known as evolutionary astrology. But what we are going to see in the next video, when we do Trump and Musk together, is here's Musk's South Node in Leo. Here's Trump's entire first house. But what you can see is this connection between his South Node, which we always associate with the past, including past lives. So Musk was a leader. He was very Leonian in a past life. There are many ways of looking into something like this, and I couldn't help but think of the possibility of these two incredibly powerful figures having a powerful past life connection. This is showing us something very deeply connected on a soul level. Have they been here before? And if so, are they repeating a past life pattern? And what may have that past life been? And as I speculated on that, I couldn't help but to think of some kind of connection like this. Trump as the king and Musk as the court alchemist who whispered in the king's ear. And bonus points to anyone who can identify the inspiration for this particular portrayal of Musk as a medieval alchemist and advisor to the royal court. And here we have Trump as a sort of medieval king. Or was he an Elizabethan queen, right? And I've speculated, we talk about Trump's difficult relation integrating his own feminine. Maybe it was King Trump, maybe it was Queen Trump. This is sort of a much more imaginative and fantastic way of using astrology, but it's fun to play with, right? And I was thinking, ooh, right, was Trump a king? Was Trump a queen? And I wrote about this in the article, like, you know, they had this alliance, but was it a power struggle, right? Were they warring feudal lords vying for power and territory? Because while it shows us a synergy in their power, there's also this incredible potential for conflict. And that's what I want to explore in our subsequent videos. So the next time we get together, we'll look at a deeper dive of what might be the deeper karmic connection between these two larger-than-life characters. So that will be the next video, American Plutocracy. And I'm already doing the preparation for that video. I wrote an article about it. You can read that on Substack as well if you subscribe over there. But it's pretty fascinating when you look at the two charts together and start to see, okay, how are they going to interact? What is the attraction, right? What is the potential repulsion? So there's a lot of symbiosis potential there, and there's a lot of tension, right? Light and shadow, as we've demonstrated here with Musk's chart. We're going to see that exemplified, even amplified in the charts of the two men together, which is really fascinating, and we'll do that in the next video. So I hope you'll tune in for that. All right, that's it for this one. If you've liked this so far, and if you haven't liked or subscribed before, please do. Try to spread the word on this channel. I would love for more people to be able to see these kinds of videos and to use this tool of astrology in this way, because I think it is profound. And I'm hoping that we all learn from this, right? We can learn from looking at the charts of these powerful and famous figures, but recognize we all have these qualities within us, right? And they are representative of the time that we are living through, but we all are in it. We're all in this together. And so I hope you'll appreciate that insight. I hope you get something out of it for yourself and learn something about your own chart in the process, because that's part of the power of this tool. So, all right, that's it for this video. Until next time, Sat Nam, everyone.